The Hoodsbrough Hostilities, Part 3. Red Quentin airs his grievance. Red Quentin and his revolutionaries considered the Hoodsbrough post office as their own personal property. They were most upset that Bella Salmonella had ransacked it under their very noses. Although the kicking that they had administered to Ernie the ox had provided them with some small consolation, they did not feel that this was altogether sufficient. They therefore determined to drop in on the spaghetti mob and air their grievance. On the outskirts of Hoodsbrough was a patch of woodland, and in that woodland was a cottage, and in that cottage was a still, and minding the still was Big Bruno. Now usually Big Bruno would have delegated this work to one of his sidekicks, but after recent events he was somewhat short-handed. Tommy Timmy had been decapitated. Tommy's sister Posy was still in hospital, as now was Ernie the ox. That left Bella Salmonella, but as Bella had explained to Bruno, her recent exertions had quite exhausted her, and she needed some me time to recover from her cuts and scrapes and restore her mental health. She had therefore booked herself into an expensive spa in Switzerland, where she had established a regular routine. In the morning she took the waters. In the afternoon she would read a romantic novel, preferably involving a wealthy duke. She would then dress for dinner, which was preceded by a cocktail or two and followed by a few hands of cards. Her fellow guests included a number of wealthy gentlemen, who she distracted with her décolletage as she stacked the deck and lightened their wallets. So, when Red Quentin's baby Austin pulled up at the end of the drive, Big Bruno was the only member of the spaghetti mob in residence at the woodland cottage. Red Quentin's car had 3 occupants. There was Red Quentin himself, who had brought along his trusty baseball bat, Jabby Jethro with his inevitable pitchfork, and Steve the Stab, armed with a lethal selection of cutlery. Quentin and Steve ambled up the drive toward the cottage. Jethro had some trouble extracting his pitchfork from the constricted confines of the diminutive automobile, and therefore lagged behind them. Red Quentin waited for Jethro to catch up, while he sent Steve the Stab on ahead to suss out the joint. As Steve sidled up to the front of the cottage, Quentin motioned to Jethro to head around the back. Jethro positioned himself outside the back door, pitchfork at the ready. Quentin then strolled up the drive to the front door and gave it a lusty blow with his baseball bat. Big Bruno did not answer this knock at his front door. It seemed that he did not want to meet with his visitors. He burst through the back door at some considerable velocity, only to be confronted by the prongs of Jabby Jethro's pitchfork. Big Bruno came off the worst in that encounter, but at the price of a rather deep and nasty scratch, he did manage to push past Jethro and head off at speed toward the road. Maybe Bruno should have kept on running, but looking back, he saw that the only thing standing between him and his car was Steve the Stab. Big Bruno had significant confidence in his own pugilistic skills. He reckoned that he could easily knock Steve over and get to his car, and in his car he could outpace the baby Austin, which he could not do on foot. Big Bruno therefore charged headlong at Steve the Stab, throwing a combination of punches. Now, had any one of these punches landed, it would probably have done Steve significant damage, but none of them did. Red Quentin ran to his colleague's assistance, bat swinging. He only managed to land a glancing blow but it was sufficient to cause Big Bruno to revise his plans and run away down the drive, closely pursued by Red Quentin, with Steve the Stab and Jabby Jethro coming up behind to lend a hand. But Red Quentin did not require any assistance. He caught up with Big Bruno and clubbed him, an almighty blow, knocking him stone cold and putting an end to the proceedings. When Big Bruno came to, covered in blood and with a splitting headache, he found that he had been deposited in a ditch in the middle of nowhere, many miles from Hoodsbrough. In his pocket was a note. This informed him that, while unconscious, he had been tried by the People's Court, found guilty of being a capitalist oppressor, and accordingly sentenced to death. However, the people were merciful. As long as he stayed away from Hoodsbrough, the sentence would be suspended, but if he returned, the people would suspend him by the neck from the nearest lamp-post. Big Bruno never did return to Hoodsbrough.